Brian Wilson, Mary Catherine Ham, Brian Neiman, today's newsmakers, and you, the Morning Majority. 105.9 FM. And AM 630.
WMAL. That'll get your blood going on a Monday morning. A little Rolling Stones. Good morning, 6:36 on the Morning Majority. Brian Wilson and Mary Catherine Ham in today. Brian Neiman taking the week off to spend some time with family. We have on the line Eli Lake, who's a senior national security correspondent for Newsweek and also writes for the Daily Beast. Good to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, listen, let's talk about something that I think it's just going to happen sooner or later, and that is what's going on with Iran and their desire to build nuclear weapons. The EIEIO came into the Iran. They looked around. They asked some questions. They were getting absolutely no cooperation from the Iranians, and so they left and said that very thing. Also, have suggested since then that they believe that the Iranians are boosting their capacity to refine uranium. What's going to happen here? And isn't Israel in a position of having to eventually do something?
I think the Israelis, everything we're hearing right now is that all of, we've been hearing that the Israelis may bomb Iran for, probably since 2006, 2005. But the difference is that at this point, I think that the relationship between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Obama is so fraught, and there is such distrust that, there's very little I think the Americans can do, even though Israel is such a close ally, to provide, assurances that Netanyahu is going to trust that Obama would take care, or that would use force if the sanctions didn't work.
Right.
And the Israelis have another issue, which is that there is a facility outside of Qom called Fordo, and if advanced centrifuges are put into this underground facility, which is also on a Revolutionary Guard Corps base, the Israelis believe that they will have lost their window to affect the trajectory of the program through bombing. So there's that other point as well, which is that they need to act quickly or in the next few months in order to have any effect at all if they choose to do anything like that.
How much effect could they have? As long as the stuff hasn't gone underground yet, how much effect can they realistically have with Israel's available firepower?
Well, if you take out the Natanz facility and the Fordo facility, those are two known sort of massive enrichment sites that
right.
at various points before they were caught were kept from the IAEA and the international community. That would have an effect, I guess, a delaying effect. But the Iranians have a program. They have scientists who know how to do this. And anything, including an American strike, all you would get in the end would be delay. But that's the same for things like Stuxnet, or for that matter, the killing of Iranian scientists. You're only talking about buying time, and ultimately, I think, the idea would be you buy enough time so that a better government can come along in the current group of sort of ex-terrorists who run the regime in Iran right now.
So the U.S. probably not in the. It's not. It doesn't seem like they're going to be taking any action. They'll stand on the sidelines here.
From everybody, from every senior official in the administration, is give the sanctions time to work. And I have to say, the sanctions against Iran are unprecedented.
Right.
The Iranians are basically, the Iranian central bank is in the process of being delisted from the world financial system. That means that, let alone, like most sanctions, they work and they say, well, we're going to punish foreign companies that do investment in Iran's oil sector. That was the nature of Iranian sanctions for years. Now the sanctions are, if you're Iran and you want to sell your oil to a country that has a relationship with America's financial markets, you're going to have to figure out a way to get payment for that oil that is, not through electronic transfers. You're going to have to get like a suitcase full of cash, right, or maybe kind of barter in kind. But that's having a huge effect on the economy. The Iranian rial has dropped by more than, I think, 70% in the last 6 months or 5 months. Don't hold me to that exact figure because it's constantly changing, but that's pretty significant. So I think that what President Obama is going to be telling Prime Minister Netanyahu in the visit later this week is, give the sanctions time to work. We're committed to that. But I don't think he's prepared to say is, if the sanctions don't work, we will bomb them if you don't.
Right. Eli, let me ask you a little bit about Afghanistan. Riots happening, several people dead, including U.S. servicemen, possibly spreading to Pakistan and Iran, the riots, over the inadvertent but improper disposal of Korans at a U.S. military base. The president apologized for this to Karzai. Some people, conservatives go, I can't believe he's apologizing again. Some people argue, well, this is sort of an easy way to maybe diffuse the situation. Can that actually work to diffuse the situation?
Every year, the Taliban gins up another one of these controversies.
Right.
And we saw this as going back to the Bush administration when Newseek magazine ran that story in their Periscope about the Qurans being flushed in the toilet. And, that turned out, to be, I don't think they retracted it, but it turned out that their original source kind of went back on it. But they would find an excuse for this kind of stuff anyway.
Right.
And, there's two different things going on here. From the perspective of the Afghanistan war, you need to issue these kinds of, apologies, which I think make most of us in the West just grimace, because, when somebody does something to an older New Testament, you don't see Jews and Christians wives and killing people. But at the same time, for the purposes of counterinsurgency and the U.S. goals in the war, you got to kind of swallow that stuff because that's the logic of the war. But this then asks the question: what are you doing if, after more than a decade, in Afghanistan, you still have this dynamic where, advisors in their interior ministry who are there to make them a more professional service, competent of defending themselves against terrorism, are killed because of the reaction to this kind of fanatic and lunatic reaction.
Right.
And I can see a lot of Americans sort of saying, it's just not worth it, and to hell with them. And that, what I would imagine, what I heard from somebody, and I'm just kind of relaying this, I can't give their words, that, what Obama should have said is he should have apologized that George W. Bush did not, just drop a bunch of daisy cutters on Afghanistan after 9/11. If you think about it, the American response to try to say we're going to have a stake in rebuilding the country was, in the grand scheme of kind of history of warfare, was very humane.
Right.
And here, more than 10 years later, the responses you get are these kinds of overreactions which kill American soldiers. It is, I think, an area where you're going to see it's a real political hot button.
All right.
And I think you're going to see a change. The Republican Party supported these kinds of counterinsurgencies under Bush, and I think that the side of that sort of is very skeptical of that is going to be winning out, particularly among the Republicans and
All right.
Democrats.
All right, Eli, thank you so much for joining us here on the Morning Majority. We greatly appreciate it.